Thank you. That's quite an introduction. It made me tired just listening to it. I thought, man, I did all these things. It's funny. People ask me all the time, what do you think of what you've done? Or when do you plan on stopping? Or what do you think of a book that you've written? And I never think of what I've done. And I never reread a book I've written. Because all there is what's ahead. All there is so much more to do. And in actuality, I always think of all the things which I haven't done, and I'm always frustrated by how little I feel that I've gotten done in one lifetime. So this is a long slideshow, and I want to give you a lot of time. Can you see it okay back there? Because I can't see it too well up here. All right, I want to take us on a trip today, a trip to a place that until recently, relatively few people have heard about or know much about, a country called Myanmar, known to most people as Burma, until its name was changed in 1989 by the current ruling military junta. This is an incredible land, called the Golden Land until the early part of the 20th century, due to its resource wealth and economic progress. In a few short decades, by the mid-20th century, unfortunately, this country would join the ranks of the poorest countries in the world, a status which, unfortunately, it holds to this day. In 2004, the national gross per capita income was $202, annual income, compared to 10 times that in neighboring Thailand, and even 3 times that in the poorest areas of India. However, it's also known as the Land of Smiles, a nomer that actually still holds also to this day, fortunately. It's an incredible world, a world which, when you step into it, feels as if the clock has stopped for decades. It has stopped socially, it has stopped, unfortunately, economically, and it has stopped in many ways politically. And yet, when you roam the countryside, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, how the people act towards you, it is very, very similar to the descriptions put forth by Huxley's novel, Burmese Days, written in 1934. Now, because of these things, and maybe feeding into these things, is the fact that Myanmar, Burma, is also known to be a country, for the scientists, for the biologists, for the people interested in wildlife, as the place with more intact forest, more species diversity, and more endemism than any other country in the Indo-Pacific region. And most of this wildness occurs in one particular region of the country, into the far, far north, a hidden away, incredibly rugged area bordered by Tibet to the north, Arunachal Pradesh and Assam of northeast India to the west, and Yunnan province of China to the east, an area called the Kachin state. This, to biologists who really search for little-known places or looking for new species or trying to figure out what we don't know yet, this was one of the world's holy grails. It was into this world that after years of trying, I finally got permission in the early 90s and ended up doing an expedition in 1995, 1996, into the furthest reaches of northern Myanmar, all of which is documented in a previous book I wrote called Beyond the Last Village, a trip that took us. This was actually considered one of the local people's better bridges. A trip that took us all the way up into some of the most unknown parts of the eastern Himalayas, where you still had 20,000-foot peaks which hadn't been climbed. Okay. Now this pointer is not working real well. Let me try it. This, can you see the red? northern Myanmar. The blue is snow-capped mountains. All my travels took me right up in this region. The reason for that trip was biological exploration, but the other major reason was following up on something I had been doing for over a decade in other parts of Asia, trying to figure out where the last least known haunts, where the northernmost extension of the tiger was. Now I could say Bengal tiger or I could say Indo-Chinese tiger, because it is in fact in this northern region where there's no distinction, where the so-called Bengal subspecies merges with how they delineated the Indo-Chinese subspecies, when in reality they're both exactly the same. I needed to find out where this tiger still existed, and I wanted to find out whether rumors might be true that there were places up here, like further north, where the tiger might overlap with the snow leopard. There were rumors that the snow leopard might be coming into northern Myanmar. Unfortunately, I found a lot of negatives. There were no snow leopards coming into Myanmar, never seemed to have been, although we did find blue sheep, never before documented in Myanmar. And unfortunately, there were no more tigers. All the tigers in that part of the country had been wiped out. But what had happened was every time I asked about tigers, the local people would say to me, "You're in the wrong place. You should be in a place called Wukong Valley. That's where all the tigers are." And I said, "Well, have you been there?" Nobody I knew had been there. They said, "Well, no, we haven't been there," because they don't call it Wukong Valley. They call it, in the Burmese language, the Valley of Death. So they were worried that nobody who went there came out alive. But they said if I wanted to go find tigers, that would be the place to go. So as you can imagine, that was really intriguing. The Wukong Valley, I had flown over it many times, going up to northern Myanmar. And many times I had looked out of the side of the plane, it was a small plane, and seen nothing but extensive wilderness, wondering what that wilderness was. This valley here is surrounded by high mountains here. This is a satellite photo. This is the Wukong Valley. And I had always flown up over that valley in order to go up into northern land in the last town called Putao in northern Burma. Well, it took me another 2 years to get permission, and finally in 1999, the government gave me permission to do an expedition into Wukong Valley. Although, for the first time ever, I'd been working with the government by that time for about 5 years, and I'd been to some really remote, rugged, dangerous areas, relatively dangerous. This was the only time that the government asked me to sign a waiver saying that if something happened to me, it wasn't their responsibility. Now, I don't know, so I signed it. I don't know why a dictatorship cared about me signing a piece of paper, because if I died up there, they wouldn't have done a thing anyway. When I first set foot in Wukong Valley, it was like being in almost somebody's idea of Shangri-La. It was this incredible wilderness with mountains and beautiful, high, untouched forests extending as far as the eye could see and continuing all the way into India, into Assam. Now, from the air, it looked like there was no access into Wukong Valley, no easy access other than walking or boats or something. It turns out, little did I know, because I'm not a World War II buff. If I had been a World War II aficionado, I would have known about Wukong Valley long before I needed any Burmese person or any tribal person to have ever told me about Wukong Valley. Because lo and behold, Wukong Valley happened to have been one of the most famous and unbelievable theaters of World War II. Cutting right through Wukong Valley is an old dirt road. A dirt road known famously as either the Lido Road or the Stillwell Road. That simple dirt road goes down in history as the greatest engineering feat of World War II. It took 2 years $120 million in the currency of the time. It took 17,000 engineers and 40 to 50,000 people working 24 hours a day to cut this road. This road was going to be the savior of the Asian theater. This road was built by the Americans when no one said it was possible to do, when the Japanese took the Burma Road, cut off China from all the Allied forces, and threatened to knock China out of the war so that they could then turn around and take India, which would have meant that the Japanese would have taken the whole Asian theater. The Americans and the British knew that the only way to save the Asian theater was to get Burma back from the Japanese. And the only way to get Burma back was to get back onto the Burma Road. And the only way was to keep China in the war. They tried doing things like flying airplanes over northern Wukong Valley, a place infamously called the Hump, where over 600 Allied planes went down and over 1,000 pilots went missing. And unfortunately, I ran into some of those planes during our time there. But they built this road at a huge human cost, huge financial cost, and unfortunately, this road, Wukong Valley, actually was talked about at one time, strategized over, and planned by people like Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Mao Zedong, Chiang Kai-shek, and Lord Mountbatten. Wukong Valley had been used for drops by Wingate's Chindits, by Merrill's Marauders, by these famous World War II groups who were dropped into the jungles to fight the Japanese and gain back the Burmese theater. It was all done out of this area. And yet, by the time I came back here, it was all jungle, but this road, which the Americans had built and had not been touched since that time, was still very much intact, with old abandoned jeeps and some of the old oil and gas pipelines just strewn all over the place. The road wasn't in great shape, but it was good enough shape. That's not bad. Are you kidding me? That's not bad shape. We were able to use the road to access as far in as possible, but that only took us part way. In order to penetrate deep into Wukong Valley, we used elephants. Now, I love this picture because it's really a fake picture. It's not fake in that we did try riding elephants, but if anybody has ridden elephants in the jungle in rough topography, you would know it's the most uncomfortable, horrendous thing that you could do for your back and your spinal cord. So we ended up trying this for about 2 hours, taking plenty of pictures, then getting off and putting all of our belongings on top of the elephants, and we walked. And walking was much easier than riding elephants. But even elephants couldn't go past a certain point, and when we couldn't take elephants, we just got off and either walked, or we did bring in boats, because Wukong Valley also happens to be the watershed for the Chinwin River, the second largest river, second only to the Irrawaddy River in Burma, one of Asia's great river systems. So we took boats deep into the jungle in order to look for what was there. Now, from the air, people said, nobody lives in Wukong Valley. The malaria is too bad. People die too much. It's death. You won't come out, blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out people did live back in there, several thousand. We estimate about 15,000 at the time when I first went back in there. Most of them were fairly simple tribal people who lived a simple way of life, using mostly things like crossbows, but they were not out of touch with the outside world, as you could see by that Casio watch the guy's wearing. I should do a Casio commercial. No matter where I go in the world, these people, almost totally naked, are wearing Casio watches. No, it's amazing. They end up trading them with the Chinese. They end up getting them it's just, and these Casio watches have stopped working years ago. Years ago. I mean, a lot of them have broken fronts. It doesn't matter. It's like us wearing jewelry. It's just a prize. I've never seen a Casio watch in the jungle, which is working still, but they're all wearing Casio watches. Some of the people had guns, but all of the guns were homemade. This is a homemade black powder rifle. And I love this picture because the people didn't use these guns to hunt because they were scared of it. They didn't like it. There was too much backflash from the black powder, and it would burn them. So they would use these to play. They would use their crossbows to hunt, and they would use these to play because whenever they would shoot, they would close their eyes. So they'd never hit anything with the guns, but they could knock a lizard off a tree with their crossbows. Now, as soon as we went in there, I could see within it, you know when you're in a rich wildlife area. You know it. I've spent enough years in bad wildlife areas, bad meaning where all the animals have been killed off, to know when I'm in, and I've spent very, very little time in great ones, because great wildlife areas don't exist much anymore. You know you're in a great area, because when you enter it, there's wildlife tracks. You don't have to see animals. You don't just see tigers and leopards, but you see tracks. You see their sign. You see a lot of scrapes from marking in order for them to mark their ranges. There was sign of animals everywhere and plenty of sign of tiger. But I needed evidence, proof, real data for the government, so we set up camera traps near things like beautiful fresh tiger sign. And sure enough, it didn't take more than a day or two till I didn't need beautiful pictures, though it's always nice. Usually, though, I get these rear-end pictures. But that's enough. That's enough to identify the tigers by their stripes and to take tiger photos. This was enough, and there was wildlife everywhere. I actually could have stayed in that jungle for 2 months, but I only stayed a month because I felt like it wouldn't do me any good. I would have loved to, but it just didn't do me any good staying another month. There was an urgency. I had hit upon what really was kind of a holy grail of species, of animals still alive. I had to get back to the government and make sure that the best parts of this area, the most remote, uninhabited parts of this area, got saved. So I got out of there after a month, sat down with my team, and did what I love doing more than anything else in life. Well, almost anything, now that I have children. We sat around with maps and looked at the maps and said, what do we think we can get saved? What do we think we can get the government? It's always, it's funny. Books are written about reserve design, about how do you design the optimal protected area? How do you get a protected area? How do you shape it? The reality is you go to a government and get as much as you can, whatever you can, wherever you can, whatever they'll give you. And if you go to a government and you ask them something and they say yes too fast, you ask for too little. So it's always a game. It's a game of negotiation like everything else, especially if they want to save, because you just don't go and say, hey, give me this for tigers. I go and say, this is your watershed. This is your clean water. This is going to help your clean air. This is what's keeping all these people in the region healthy. All the economic factors, as well as this will save your tigers. So we went to the government. Well, first we looked on a map and we decided how big an area we were going to ask for. I decided I was going to go for broke. I thought I was going to go for broke. I went for an area much bigger than any other area I had ever asked for. And then I did the hard work, the work that conservation movies don't ever show you. Wildlife films don't ever show you. People don't ever write in papers or talk about. The months and months and months spent meeting government officials in their homes, taking them out to dinner, drinking with them in bars, talking to them, showing them maps, negotiating with them, and convincing them more than anything else, for whatever reason, that you needed to get an area protected. Finally, in early 2002, the government acquiesced. And they gave me what I asked for, all of it. I had asked for 2,500 square miles 2,500 square miles, over 6,000 square kilometers of pristine jungle where no people lived in the center of Wukong Valley as a wildlife sanctuary tiger reserve. The last area I had gotten in Myanmar, which was the largest protected area in the whole country, was in the far north, the Himalayan park, where I went way overboard, I thought, and asked for 1,500 square miles, and they gave it to me. Now I asked for 2,500 square miles. That's the size of some very small countries. They said, okay, pristine, bordered by the road, by mountains. It was perfect. I felt I had been, by this time, 2002, I had been in Myanmar about 7, 8 years. I felt this is it. This is my swan song. It's more than I'd ever done in my life. We've protected a really good, what's probably going to be a really good, viable population of tigers. It is at 2,500 square miles, the world's largest tiger reserve. It's time to move on to another wild place. And I was already planning my departure, thinking of where I would go next. I was in New York when the phone call came from my office, from the office we had in Rangoon, in Yangon. And our people in the office said, Alan, the Director General of Forestry has asked if you would come back for a secret meeting about Wukong Valley. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm in New York. Nobody asks for a secret meeting in a dictatorship. You just don't go to secret meetings in dictatorships. And especially the Director General of the Forestry Department. I said, what's this about? He said, honestly, I don't know. And I said, that's impossible. You went to school with these guys? Find out what it's about. He said, I tried. I do not know what it's about. He just says he has to talk to you, and it's a secret meeting. I said, what do you mean a secret meeting? He said, because the Wukong Valley Reserve has already been set up, what he wants to talk to you about, it has to be done outside of Rangoon. Okay. You don't get that kind of call. I've never gotten that kind of call before. So I flew from New York back to Burma, and I had this meeting. So we had a meeting in a little coffee shop about 5 hours outside of Rangoon with a representative from the Director General, with a representative from the police department, all government officials. And I have to tell you, I'd been through a lot in life by that time, and I was never so shocked, never so blown away. What they said to me was, they said, you just got Wukong Valley preserved, the 2,500 square miles. But the surveys you've been doing on tigers throughout Burma, because we had started tiger surveys 5 years previously. We were trying to systematically survey the whole country for tiger presence. And we had just finished at this time that the reserve got set up. He said, your tiger surveys show that there's only 2 places left in all of Burma where tigers live. And I said that's right, Wukong Valley, and one other place down by the Thai border called the Tenasserim. Only 2 places left. Your tigers are almost gone. And if you're going to save them, then we have to save them in Wukong Valley and in this other area. So then the government representative looked at me. It was the Director of Wildlife, in fact. And he said, so why'd you only ask for 2,500 square miles? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, if this is the only place left, why didn't you take the whole Wukong Valley? Why didn't you ask for the whole Wukong Valley? And I said, the whole Wukong Valley? Here's the area I got set aside is in red. That's 2,500 square miles. The whole Wukong Valley is that red plus all the green. So I said the whole Wukong Valley is nearly 9,000 square miles. That's the size of the state of Vermont. That's larger than many small countries. That has inside of it schools, churches, temples, Buddhist temples, a police station, a fire department. It's got a town. It's got tribal groups who can't stand one another. It's got a lot of things going on inside of it. And he said, but does it have tigers? This is what they're saying to me. The shoe was on the other. It was bizarre. He said, does the area outside of what you set aside have tigers? And I said, yes. He said, well, then why didn't you ask for it? We think you should go to the government and ask for all of Wukong Valley. And I said, you are the government. What do you mean I should go to the government? But I knew what he meant. What he meant is, by this time, I had the ear of the dictators, of some of the dictators, like the Minister of Forestry. He wanted me, and they don't, even though that's the Director General of Forestry. He knew I could go to the minister. He wanted me to go to the minister, go to one of the dictators and say, guess what? You just gave me 2,500 square miles, but it's not enough. I want 8,500. No, actually, I asked for 9,000 square miles. I had to think about it. You would think that would be a dream come true. Well, they're saying do it. Why wouldn't you? I had a sure success. I had an area of 2,500 square miles with tigers, with leopards, with a lot of wildlife, no people inside. It was defensible. Nobody lived in that orange space. That could work. That could be a workable reserve. And I could walk away right then with the biggest win of my life. What he was at, and I had to admit, it was personal too, an ego. But what he was asking me was to take on the whole valley with people, with tribal groups, with everything. Take on a small micro version of the real world, so to speak. I had to say yes. But the reason I had to say yes is because after nearly 30 years of working in conservation, having been brought up with the traditional wildlife paradigm that the way to do conservation is to go in, find an area without people, with animals, lock the area up with hard boundaries, get the people out, keep the animals in, and protect it. I had done that my whole career. And guess what? It wasn't working. It wasn't working. Hard boundary protected areas don't work. Not for the big animals, not for the migratory species, and not for the large mammals who need good genetic exchange in the long term. Yes, I would have a great viable breeding population in that orange, but what about in the future? What about if that whole green became nothing but India, nothing but human landscape? Then would it survive? It would survive 50 years, 100 years, but that's not what you're after in conservation. You're after indefinite survival. You're after planning forever, forever. If I can't save tigers, what I realize, and everybody like me in the field realizes, is unless we can start to learn how to save wildlife, especially the big animals, the big mammals and the big cats, within the human landscape, as well as in the core protected areas, we're not going to save them long term. I was being handed an opportunity to test that, to test my resolve, even though it could have had a huge chance of failing. I said, okay, I'll give it a go. I'll try. I pulled out all this. Now, you just can't say, okay, because these guys weren't in the position to even offer this to me. So I pulled out all stops. Oh, also, I'm getting ahead of myself. Part of why I was worried about even doing this was because in this huge area, not only were there thousands of people with schools and temples and everything, but there were major indigenous groups, major tribal groups who didn't like each other. And they were really interesting groups. There were the Naga. These were very remote Naga people up in the mountains who only stayed up in the mountains. And were these people, this particular Naga group, had only been documented by the British to have stopped taking heads in the early 60s. It's not that long ago. And I wasn't sure that some of them weren't still around there doing it back then. There were the Shan people down in the lowlands or in the mid-elevation, and then there were the Lisu, the absolute best hunters in the whole country, down in the lowlands who didn't like the Naga. The Naga and the Lisu didn't like one another at all and didn't mix. But the area outside of the sanctuary I had already gotten established. What I did know was that there was beautiful, beautiful grasslands, lands I didn't take in the sanctuary because this was prime agricultural land. This was good, open land and fertile. To try to fight for this land would be very difficult. This is the first kind of natural grasslands are almost unheard of in the world. These are the most extensive. Wukong Valley has the most extensive natural grasslands left in all of Asia, right here. That was the opportunity. So I took it. It took me several months. It took me using all my contacts at the UN, which I built up through Kofi Annan and meeting him and all these contacts, which he actually helped me with because he couldn't do it publicly. He had to do it very backdoor privately since we were sanctioning Burma at the time. And eventually I got an appointment with a man known as Secretary One. Secretary One was the #2 dictator in the Burmese government. He was the head at the time of the longest lasting military intelligence conglomerate in all of Asia. He was absolutely the most feared man in the whole country. His name was Kin Yunt, and at the time he was prime minister and head of military intelligence, and he was called Secretary One. He's now in jail, but no, he is, mainly because he lost the battle for power with the senior general, Tan Shui. And as bad as this guy is, he's a better man than the guy who's currently in power. But so I finally got an audience with the prime minister. They couldn't believe it because nobody tries to meet this man. Usually my staff come with me to meetings. No one would come with me to this meeting. These were all people of his staff. I met with Kin Yunt, the prime minister. He knew all about me. He already had my previous book. He knew everything about my back. His intelligence unit had done a full search, and he proved it to me by mentioning some things in my family's background and about my religion, about some trips I'd taken and other things. And he proved to me that he knew things, and then he asked me, he knew exactly what I wanted. He knew why I was there. He knew everything beforehand. But he liked tigers. He liked tigers a lot. And when I told him, I said, I didn't make a mistake, I told him. The 2,500 square miles is a great area. That's what we need as the core tiger reserve. The only thing I forgot to do is to ask for the buffer area, which I need for the tiger reserve. And that buffer area happens to be 6,500 miles in size. And Kin Yunt asked a lot of questions. He's an intelligent man. His wife's a doctor. He's got college education, where not all the dictators do. And in the end, he said, I'll agree to it if you can tell me you can make it happen. He said, if I say that I will set the wheels in motion to set aside 9,000 square miles of my country where the people can live inside of it, you can't move people out. He said that to me. He said, you've got to make it an area that's not only good for the wildlife, but is better for the livelihoods of the people, so that both your tigers are living and the people's lives are better. Can you do that? And I said, absolutely yes. And I'm thinking, I have no idea how the hell I'm going to do this. Because this was unlike anything I had ever attempted before. But you cannot show uncertainty. You cannot. So I said, yes, absolutely. I know how to do it. He said, okay, I'll set the wheels in motion. So while he started setting the wheels in motion, I rushed all our teams. I pulled in all of our tiger teams all over the country and set them into Wukong Valley because we had to know what we were dealing with. We had to know where the best populations of tigers were and other species, what other animals were out there, what the people were doing, what was going on there. So all of our people set out camera traps. And I wanted to know how many tigers we were dealing with. Because up until now, we knew there were tigers there, but not how many. So we started putting out tiger camera traps. And we started getting pictures of tigers. Beautiful pictures of tigers. Now, as many of you probably know by now, because it's been a lot in the literature, in the news and things, tigers, no two tigers have the same stripe patterns. The stripe patterns of a tiger, in fact, the patterns of any animal which has patterns is distinctive from one animal to the next. Now that's amazing, isn't it? Why does a tiger have stripes all the time and not sometimes spots, sometimes rosettes? Why does it always have stripes and yet no two tigers have the same pattern of stripes? And it's the exact same reason as our fingerprints. That is the fingerprint for the animals. Every single human being has a fingerprint, is born with a fingerprint. And yet no two human beings statistically, I mean, with enough people you might, but no two people for the most part have the same fingerprint. Why? Because having a fingerprint, having stripes is genetically controlled. But the pattern is not. The actual pattern of our fingerprints and the pattern of tiger stripes is developed in the fetus, randomly. It's a completely random process. The genome tells you to have a fingerprint, but the development of it in the embryo, in the fetus, is a random process. So no two animals have the same stripes, no two people the same fingerprints. Using that, by taking pictures of every tiger walking by our cameras on both sides, we can identify individual animals. By placing cameras in proper grids, we can actually do densities. We can count them. We know how many tigers there are. Now, what I hadn't expected, though I should have, I just didn't think about it, is that not only were the cameras great for telling us how many tigers there were, but the cameras showed us that this area had the full complement of all the species. Oh, I didn't even mean to go there yet. You just said, wow, I didn't know what was going on. All the species that it should have at the same time. So it had leopards. It had clouded leopards, one of the least known, but in fact, not as rare as we have come to think of it, medium-sized cats in the entire world. A spectacular, spectacular cat. Clouded leopards. What is this? It's not the fox, but it looks like it's bigger. It's a dhole. It's the Asian wild dog. Dhole. Himalayan black bear. What kind of deer? Sambar, major prey of tigers. Wild pig, says Scrofe. Out here, it gets to be 500-600 pounds. Good prey for tigers. And what I hadn't expected to find, my favorite, the little diminutive leaf deer, a barking deer. I had discovered a new species of deer that I had first discovered, new to science, on my trip up in the Himalayas. And I didn't know it was in the mountains of Wukong Valley. So it was in here as well, the leaf deer. It was all in there. This was great. But I also saw something I hadn't expected. Now keep in mind, by the time all this is happening now, it's 2002. I had first set foot in Wukong Valley in 1999. I had gotten the sanctuary, tiger reserve set up, 2,500 square miles, in 2001. I went back to the Prime Minister. He said, okay. I now was back there trapping, looking at animals in 2002. Between 1999 and 2002, a lot had changed. Because now, in the camera traps, not only was I seeing animals, but I was seeing something I hadn't seen before. I was seeing people. People walking deep in the jungle with guns and dead wildlife. And these guns weren't black powder rifles. These were real rifles, brought in from the outside. So these were hunters coming by the same exact camera traps that the tigers and the other wildlife were walking by. This was not good. What had happened? What had happened was that at the same time that the government was asking me to get all of Wukong Valley, another division of the government decided to open up Wukong Valley. And they had rebuilt all the destroyed bridges, and they had fixed the road up in a way which was now allowing travel into the deep parts of the valley. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would have done that anyway eventually in order to give better access for the local people and better access for ourselves. But what it resulted in wasn't a gradual transition. It resulted in an influx of over 100,000 people coming into Wukong Valley. Why? Why do people rush into anything on a moment's notice? Gold. Gold had been discovered. Well, gold had always been known from Wukong Valley, but the prices had become such, and they weren't even anything which they are now. But the prices had become such, and the technology had become such, that even for the hard work it takes, when I was at this exact spot in 1999, that was all solid forest all the way to the mountains. These were gold camps. And the worst thing about it was they weren't getting much gold. They weren't getting much gold. This pit, which is 1 week's worth, provided that amount of gold, which is 12,000 chat, which equals $12 at the time. Now the people say, well, how could that be worth it? It's not $12, it's 12,000 chat. And for one of the poorest nations in the world, with people where they're just paying the laborers a few chat a day and feeding them rice, bowls of rice, this was worth it. They were all on the verge of bankruptcy, but it was worth it. Now people say, what a waste. I said, that's great. I could deal with this. If they were making huge amounts of money where they could go out and buy four-wheel drives and TV sets and build brick homes, I'd have a tough time. This I could deal with. This economy, this kind of economics, I can overcome. So I said we could deal with this. And as bad as the gold mines looked, and as bad as they were in terms of how they poisoned the rivers, because these miners were using pure mercury and dumping them into the landscape. I'm behind. I got to start speeding up. This was not that bad in terms of 9,000 square miles. Keep in mind, okay, now we have 150,000 people in Wukong Valley. Horrible? Maybe. But we also have a place the size of the state of Vermont. What would you say if I said we had 150,000 people in Vermont? There's virtually nobody then in there. That could be, it doesn't matter if you have a few gold mines, a few this and that. You can still get, when you fight for large landscapes, you can tolerate a lot of abuse. The worst part is the tigers were going downhill fast now. Why? Not because of the gold mines, but because of what the gold mines brought. The 150,000 people had to be fed, and they weren't being fed by shipping pigs and chickens in from the outside. Wildlife was selling cheaper than domestic pork or chicken. So this stimulated a whole economy of hunters going out and killing all the wildlife. This is gaur, a hunter killing gaur. This is the largest wild cattle species in the world. Weighs about 2,500 pounds. And it also opened up the wildlife trade. People came in and they were killing bears just for their bear paws. And they were selling them at local markets right outside, selling tiger skins. That's leopard skins, cirrhow, bear gallbladder, tusks, and there's even, these are hanging here, if you could see it, are tiger penises. Dynamite fishing got brought in. And of course, when you have gold mining, when you have the poorest of the poor in any society, you always have two things, prostitution and drugs. And drugs started being grown in Wukong Valley. Opium, our people started running into opium plantations. Now, if that all wasn't enough to deal with in conservation, here was the added kicker. All of it was under the control of the country's largest armed insurgent army, the Kachin Independent Army, whose base was in Wukong Valley. Now, I knew this from the beginning. They knew about me. I knew about them. I wasn't stepping on their toes. We informed them when we were going in the jungle. The preserve I had set up was outside of where their base was. It was all okay. They liked the fact that I was trying to protect what they considered their own heritage, their ancestral lands. But now it was different. Now they were doing the gold mining. They were handing out guns. They were backing the wildlife trade, and they were backing opium. Couldn't happen. Couldn't be done. So I knew that it didn't matter what the central government said, what the Prime Minister said, I had to get buy-in from the KIA, from the Kachin Independent Army. And when I asked the Prime Minister, the government, if I could talk to these guys, they said, sure, they don't talk to us. If they can talk to you, that's great. So I called a meeting with them. At first, they wouldn't allow me back in their jungle headquarters. Eventually, they did. At first, they came out to me, and then eventually they allowed me to take a 6-hour boat ride back in the jungle to where they live. And we talked to their leaders, talked to them about their wildlife and how their men, all those pictures which I showed you were all Kachin Independent Army people, it turned out. It was their men hunting. Then I went on to patrols with their soldiers because they never gave their soldiers any money or any rations. So their soldiers were told to live off the land. So I asked permission if we could provision their soldiers. It was nothing. It was minor. It was pennies. We provisioned their soldiers. Then I set up a breeding program with the Kachin Independent Army for fast-breeding pigs, Vietnamese pigs. We gave them, we bought several hundred pigs, brought them back, started to show them how to do pig breeding and chicken breeding, and show them how it was in their interest that they could provide their gold mines. I didn't try to stop the gold mines because I couldn't at the time, but I said, don't kill the wildlife. And they said, show us how to feed the people and we won't kill the wildlife. So we showed them how to feed the people. Then I went to the local villages. Knowing that what was coming down the pike was getting this area preserved, I knew that I had to have buy-in. A protected area does not succeed unless people who live in it and around it believe in it and feel it's either good for them or it's bettering their lives. So I talked to the local people about what was happening, what was going to be, why we were protecting this forest, and how that would be better for them now, right now. We met with the villages, we trained Burmese. These two women are our Burmese education team. They went around with posters we made, teaching the local people what was in their own forests. We gave generators to the schools. We gave books to the schools. We actually paid, because they had schools with no teachers, because teachers didn't want to come back there in the remote area. So we paid extra salary to teachers so that they would come in there. We brought not doctors, but physician assistants back in there, set up little medical clinics. We showed them from the beginning, not just promising, but that their lives were going to be better because of the Tiger Reserve. Then I talked to all the hunters. I talked to all the headmen and all the hunters of every village. And I said, look, I know I can't stop you from hunting. And frankly, I don't care about your hunting the deer for your food. What you hunt to eat for yourself is fine. But what you hunt to sell to the gold mines is not fine. And it's going to become illegal. And you cannot kill tigers. Now, sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't work. But what we tried doing is hiring some of the best hunters to work for us. That had mixed success. Actually, probably a few more tigers died all because of it. In March 2004, the Prime Minister sent me notification that he declared the whole area. In March 2004, Wukong Valley Tiger Reserve was officially declared. We actually had to take out 500 square miles right up at the top because there were too many lisu. But it turned out 8,500 square miles, about 25,000 square kilometers, one of the largest protected areas in the world of that kind. But while I was waiting, I wasn't letting grass grow under my feet. Now, this area alone, Wukong Valley, when it got set aside, is 2% of the whole country of Myanmar. And Myanmar is the largest country in the Indo-Malayan region, 2%. But while I was getting this set aside, I was also trying to get 2 other protected areas set aside, which would hook me into Kakaborzi, the far Himalayan area, which I had surveyed in my previous years. Those 2 had been set aside a year earlier. So when Wukong Valley got set up, we now had the Northern Forest Complex. 4 protected areas totaling 13,000 square miles. It's the size of Belgium. But that didn't mean anything, really. If you really want conservation to work, to be a success, other than paper, you know that unless the people determine what the area will do, unless they buy into it and they become the ones who actually feel like they have ownership of it, it will fail. It will fail. So we had a workshop with 65 people, the business community, the scientists, the tribal people. Now, this was amazing, too. Why? Because Burma is a country where it's technically illegal to have a gathering of more than 10 people at one time. And these groups of people, having all the tribal people come together, representatives of the tribal groups, representatives of the military with the insurgent groups, had never been done. Never. But it wasn't about politics. That's the beauty. That's why I had long talks with Kofi Annan about how conservation and education and arts transcends politics. That's how you can move things forward. From the different tribal, all these 3 boys are all from different tribal groups. I didn't want the old men. I wanted the young men. I wanted the sons of the headmen who would be the next headmen who didn't hate each other yet. They came to this meeting. More importantly, we had military, we had the insurgent groups, this is an amazing picture. I got to show you this. This is a bad picture because I wasn't allowed to take this picture, so I took it secretly with my phone, with my phone camera. This man, these 3 men had never met before. This man is the commander of all the Kachin Independent Army. He's a great guy, although he's under house arrest right now. He's the commander of the Kachin Independent Army. This man is a Burmese general who's the head of all the northern forces of Burma. At the time of this meeting, not only had these 2 men never met, their armies were facing off, shooting at one another. They were killing each other, but they put it aside to come and talk about how to keep their land and their country in a decent way. It was really interesting. They could put that apart from the fighting, kind of like we do with politics. They could actually meet, talk, argue, smile, sit at the same table, break bread, drink, and talk about what was best for the people, what was best for the tigers, how both had to benefit, how the central government had to agree. And this man is the director of wildlife. He was never allowed to meet these 2 men because he was considered too low as the director of wildlife. All these 3 men sat at a separate group at the meeting, sitting over maps, talking about how this would get done. This was amazing. And they walked away, and they walked back to their armies, and they still kept on fighting, but they agreed on what we were going to cooperate on in terms of Wukong Valley Tiger Reserve. And they've stuck to it. What we talked about among everybody, among the indigenous people, among the military and the police and the business people, was how do we get people to live with wildlife? Now, the local people said, well, we've always lived with wildlife. They haven't lived with wildlife. They have killed wildlife. Killing wildlife, when you see it, is not living with wildlife. And we had to teach them that there was a better way for their children. We could make sure that their children didn't have to kill wildlife, didn't have to take pride in killing wildlife because they didn't have to do it for economic reasons. That's a tiger skull, by the way. That's Samba deer. We could get another way of living with wildlife, and we could make life better for the people with different kinds of crops, different kinds of plants, cultivating rattan, cultivating bamboo, bringing new species of rice into there. This man was at the meeting, and I had to go back and take a picture of him. This is what he does. He makes the equivalent of about 15 cents a day rafting down rapids, bringing palm fronds to villages and selling them for roof thatching. That's what he does. When he was asked, as they were all asked, what is your number one, number two, number three priorities for you and Wukong Valley in life? It wasn't, he didn't say a color TV, he might later. He didn't say a brick home, he didn't say, what they all said, all of them, to a person, was, I don't want my children to do what I do. I want a better life for my kids. I don't want my family dying from malaria and typhus and conjunctivitis. I want my kids to live and have a better life. And that was it. There was no number three. None of them put a number three. It was all, I want my kids to have a better life than I do. So in order to protect the area, we need protection also. The people have to know that there are consequences to doing the wrong thing too many times. When people killed wildlife once, and they were caught, and it wasn't killing something for food, but if they killed an animal once illegally, they were not arrested. They had to sign a document, and their picture was taken. If they did it twice, they were given a stern warning again. Third time, they were arrested. We had patrols. Then we had to form units. But all of these people, all of these young men, they all come from the different groups. They're from the insurgent group. In fact, that was a big problem at first. Some of these people are from the insurgent group. Some of them are from the different tribal groups. Some of them are local. Some are from Yangon. They're all a mixed group who go on patrol and protect the forest. They are now trained, but all those people who they go and talk to and they act against, if they do have to act against them, are their own people. They come from these villages. This is a typical patrol. This is conservation. This is the kind of conservation you never see in pretty wildlife films. You never read about in scientific papers. Frankly, it's the kind of work I never thought I'd be doing when I studied wildlife in graduate school. But this is what it takes, and it's not easy. It's now 2008. Is the reserve a success? So far, it's been an incredible success. Does that mean I don't have huge problems? No, we have huge problems in the area. But we have shut down almost all the gold mines. We have stopped almost all the opium production. And these were by people who were not local people. These were by outsiders. The local people are doing better. They have better schools. People have now started rattan plantations. We brought specialists from the New York Botanical Gardens to show them how to cultivate rattan, cultivate bamboo, cultivate orchids for sale. They're doing better, a lot better. We have a long way to go because it doesn't end. Conservation is not something that has an end point. And scientists have to get beyond that, thinking that there's a place when you can walk away and turn your back. There never is, never will be. No more than we can ever turn our back on crime in any particular city. You always have to be vigilant. There will always be problems. There will always be issues. How can people live with wildlife? How can people use the resources of the land and not totally wipe the land out and let the animals survive? How can the animals live with guns and hunting, live with people's need for salt, live with the desires of an insurgent group who want nothing more than freedom for their own people? Seems impossible, but guess what? It's not. Not if you have a big enough area. Not if you have a country-size area like the Wukong Valley. Then you can do it all. And it is happening. It is working. It is working to where I could stand up in front of you now and say, I'm not saying it's a success, because a success means it's finished. It is succeeding. It is succeeding, and it will be, I mean, it's like running a city. It's like running a state. It's like running a country. It will take continual money and vigilance to make sure that this area saves its wildlife and that these people have a better way of life than they ever had before. But in the end, each year it gets better and better and better. Every now and then, there's a year where somebody's got a big contact. Just 2 years ago, he got a permit for cutting down 200,000 acres of forest. I had to stop him. I had to fly back to Burma and go back to my prime minister was in jail by then, so I had to go to another dictator and get it stopped. We did get it. Do we always win? No, we don't always win. But that's the beauty. When you view conservation as a dynamic disequilibrium, you never aim towards a stable equilibrium, because there's no such thing in life. And conservation is no different. You aim towards a dynamic disequilibrium, which you're always watching and keeping with all the ups and downs. The average is in the middle. And then you will succeed. And that's how we've succeeded. And that will allow the people to be better off, and the tigers and the leopards and the other wildlife to be better off. Now, Wukong Valley is like a place out of time. But there are many such places in the world. Not that many of that extensive land, but in various shapes and various forms, even in the United States, there's always a battle to be fought and always a way to shape the landscape to where we can have Wukong Valleys. Because what it's about is wildlife living within the human landscape. Wildlife-human conflict. Wildlife and people living together. Now, I could just stop there and say, that's it. Wukong Valley is great. It's 8,500 square miles. It's going to have, if it succeeds as it is, it's going to have hundreds of tigers, more tigers than any other place in the world. Not now, but in the future. But that won't save tigers. If that's all I do in life, then I'm not saving tigers. If Wukong Valley is my swan song, then I've given up without knowing that we needed to go a step further to save tigers. Because Wukong Valley is one of the gems in the necklace that we have to put together to save tigers. So we have a program started 2 years ago called Tigers Forever. And those Tigers Forever sites, we have sites, and this program is costing me several $1 million a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's nothing. It should be costing $50 million a year, but nobody's giving us that kind of money. That's Wukong Valley. Using Wukong Valley as a model, we have now set up similar tiger landscapes. And in these places, we are focusing not on single protected areas, but corridor systems, large landscapes with core protected areas inside. And we are ensuring we're doing all the politically incorrect things people don't want to touch. We are focusing on stopping people from hunting tigers and their prey. We're putting aside, everybody wants to focus on feel-good, sound-good things like poverty alleviation, educational things. All those are great things, and they're needed in the long run. But none of those are saving tigers right now. Doing poverty alleviation, doing an education program in a village is not stopping those people from killing that tiger right now to take to market, to take to the Chinese medicinal trade. So we are working with the government's permission in every one of these countries in the best tiger area left to actually train guards, to equip guards. Sometimes we have to buy them guns Sometimes I even have to buy them bullets, although can't put that in the budget, and actually do what has to be done while helping the local people, because that's a part of it, to save the tigers and to count the tigers. It's not enough saying you're saving tigers. People have been saying they've been saving tigers for 20 years now, and meanwhile all the tigers are going downhill. The tigers are near extirpation now. We're measuring them. We're doing something no one else is doing. At every single site, we have camera traps up in grids, thousands of camera traps, and we're measuring them to see if we're being effective. So we might be stopping poachers, might be catching people, might be confiscating guns, but if tiger numbers are still going down, then we're doing something wrong. Then we're not finding what the critical threat is. So we're measuring as we're doing in order to make sure that tigers actually have stabilized, prey has stabilized, and tigers are starting to come back. It's only in the second year, meaning we're not going to see an increase in tiger numbers yet at any of these sites. Because tigers, because of reproduction and how young stay with the female, we can't see increases in tiger numbers if it's working for 3 years. But we do see increases in prey numbers. So at all our sites, every single site is working. Every site, because it doesn't take much. It's not brain surgery. Everybody's saying, give us money, tigers are going down, but nobody's doing it in the field. I don't meet all these other organizations out there in the field. I just meet them back here raising money. In the field, it doesn't take much brain power to know what to do to save tigers. And we're showing that at least their prey are coming back, hunting is decreasing, and hopefully by next year and the year after, I can come back to you in a few years and show you how the tiger numbers have actually increased, something no one has ever done before in tiger conservation. And we're doing the exact same thing for lions and jaguars right now. And in that way, we will save the tiger. We will. This animal is in seriously, seriously bad shape, much worse than any other cat in the world right now. But we can do this, and we have to do it. What kind of world are we in? What kind of culture are we in? How could we be proud of ourselves letting the largest cat in the world flicker out as we watch? We should be ashamed, but we don't have to be. We're going to get this. Thank you.
We're a little over, but I think we should take 3 questions, and then if you have, are you willing to stay for a few minutes?
Sure, I'm sorry I went too long.
But let's take 3 questions, and then that was simply wonderful. Thank you so much. Question 1, anyone?
Yes.
How does the current political situation in Burma affect what you are doing?
Well, that's what's so interesting. It's funny because people have asked me that a lot, and I knew what the answer, having worked in that country since 1995. It's actually in a bizarre way, and I'm not glad for what's happened, but it's helped me. The reason being that and I've seen this in most governments, during very unstable times, if you're a known quantity to a government, they fall back on what's comfortable to them and doable, and something they can still hold up and show as a success. So even I was shocked to find out that I was being given better access and faster permits into the backcountry, while all the problem was happening with the monks and the shootings and everything. They were not giving out any visas to foreigners. I got the longest multi-entry visa I've ever gotten, and my permits went through faster. And I asked them why. And the dictators who I know said to me, because we know you, because what you're doing is good for the country, we know that, and you can go ahead and do it. Now, it's gotten a little bit, every time I go back recently and I have a dinner or a meeting with the government, the tension, the anger and animosity towards America and Americans has way scaled up. But they keep on saying to me, don't worry, we don't view you that way. We view what you're doing. But we just can't stand your government. But it hasn't hurt me. But it took a long time. It wouldn't have been the case if I was a newcomer.
Question number 2.
Yes.
Do you have any more reserves other than Asia, or are you primarily focused in Asia?
That's a good question. No, I actually did my first reserve in Belize, in Central America, with the jaguars. That's the one I hold dearest to my heart, actually, in many ways. Right now, because we're working on all the cats, especially all the big cats, we're setting up reserves. I work with, my assistant is an Africa specialist, so he's got the African cats, Luke Hunter. He's written several books on the African cats. I'm working mostly, all I have time for, and I don't have time for it, is tigers and jaguars. He's working on snow leopards and on lions. I'm trying to set up preserves. We're doing a jaguar corridor from Mexico all the way to Argentina. And that's working well. That's way far ahead of the tiger corridor. I actually have all the countries, all the heads of state of Mesoamerica, from Mexico through Panama, have already signed a document stating that they will cooperate with the Jaguar Corridor, which we have already delineated throughout Mesoamerica. We're trying to create kind of an Appalachian trail for the jaguar. So, yes, I'm setting up protected areas in many other countries, trying to. Yes. That's a good question. Sorry, I shouldn't have said it. It's actually very bad. The numbers, Myanmar used to, when I first went in that country for the first expedition, I expected to find tigers everywhere. We thought that country had more tigers of any other country outside of India, because it used to have tens of thousands of tigers, probably over 100,000. In the Wukong Valley, our best estimate was about 100. Down in the Tenasserim Range on the Burmese-Thai border, the estimate was about 75. We think that there might be no more than 150 to 175 tigers left in all of Burma. Now, the potential for the Wukong Valley, based on its size, even with the people and everything, is about 600 tigers. If we could get it to 300 to 400 tigers, it will be, well, it won't be the largest population. The Russian Far East has about 400. It'll be the largest population outside of the Russian Far East. And that's what we're aiming towards, is that number. It's not, we can only go up from here, but it's not a sure thing, because the one danger I'm really afraid of is that they are actually, if you took 100 people and scattered them in the state of Vermont, and they just started wandering aimlessly, or more importantly, they each established their own range around supermarkets or whatever, it's really a problem of whether these animals can meet, whether there are enough, we have no idea what the sex ratio is, and we have no idea if there's going to be enough breeding that goes on to be able to repopulate. We do know that since we started, there's been a sighting of a female with a cub right crossing the Lido Road, that dirt road. So that's great. So there is some breeding going on. That's all we want to know, that there is at least one female out there breeding. So that's my biggest worry. Worst case, absolute worst case, I'll drop tigers in there. There's almost no other place in the world where I would think we could reintroduce tigers. This is such a place, if they don't come back. But they have a real good shot at coming back. It's still 100 tigers. All we have to have is like 20 or so meeting one another and breeding.
Thank
Thank you. Thanks for coming.